Start with the first one that surfaced a lot. The most common theme of question is how were you able to get into Google? What is Google's hiring process like, especially for designers? And is a portfolio necessary? And if I'm looking to get into Google, like how do I approach my career?
Yeah, so I'll share a little bit of a history here, right? I think right after Ola, I actually was realizing that I had amassed a lot of body of work, a healthy bit of work, but I did not really have any record of it, right? And that was becoming problematic, not for Google or anything, just in general, right? So I wanted to document all of that. And from all the notes and all the saved files and mocks that I had, I basically started like documenting a story. And at the same time, a friend of ours, right, had already joined Google for a while, and there was an opening in the Bangalore office, and she wanted to refer me. So I basically took that opportunity as another sort of accelerant for me to finish my portfolio, which was already sort of in flight. So I spent about 4 months just working on the portfolio, right, and wanted to do it right. I wanted to give it the justice that it deserved, right? Like after all the work that we had done together, it needed to sort of come out as in its authenticity, right? About how deep we had gone, how rigorous we had been, and all of that. So to capture all that, it took its time. But after four odd months, I had something that I was satisfied with, and that started the conversation at Google, right? Even with a referral, having a portfolio for an interaction design position or even a visual design, if you are going for that, it's a non-starter for even a conversation with the company if you don't have a portfolio. So me having finished that in time actually was quite helpful. Right. And basically what happens is people like to meet you unless they know that they are going to have a fruitful conversation, especially in a hiring context, right? So they want to ensure that you meet a certain level of quality bar before they even engage in a conversation, because every step of conversation that the company has with you is expensive, right? Both for them, for you, time-wise and money-wise, right? So that is a door opener. Basically, having a good portfolio is just how you get in. So yeah, I think it all started there. And speaking about the Google recruitment process, it lasted for months, definitely more than a month. And I know of many people who for who the process lasted for even over 6 months. So to say that it's slow and it's very purposeful is an understatement, right? It's extremely rigorous. It basically tests every single aspect you have, and you would have multiple doubts along the way, right? It has about 8 or 9 rounds of basically vetting, and every single one of them is meaningfully designed to test a specific aspect to being a designer. So it's not just about your core skills. It's about how good of a communicator you are, how good of a collaborator you are, how good do you empathize, right? How well do you empathize with others and others' skills and others' jobs and others' fields, right? So it puts you through all of that. And I wouldn't say it's perfect now, having seen the process from the other side of the table, right? Like I wouldn't say that it's perfect, but it definitely is one of the best in the market for a reason, right? And sometimes you can argue about efficiency versus speed, right? Like how good you want to be versus how fast you want to be in hiring. But I think the process is currently at the right side of the equilibrium, right? Like it does, hiring slow is never the wrong idea in general, right? Like in the hindsight, I mean, that's why it ends up sort of keeping that bar where it is, right? So that's basically been my experience. Specifically about the 8 or 9 rounds, I would say that there's a call interview over phone with somebody completely like a random designer from anywhere in the world. After that, there's portfolio screening. Portfolio screening happens. After that, there is a design exercise. The design exercise is vetted, and once the design exercise is vetted, you sort of enter the funnel, right? From where it is all about the conversations you have with the people. Right. So then it's about 5 or 6 rounds of in-person interviews with researchers, product managers, engineers, right? Front-end engineers, mostly TLMs, other designers, a senior design lead or a design manager. Yeah. And then it's sort of like a collective feedback from all of them that ends up guiding the decision.
Right. Right.
So it's a lot of manual work involved. I was lucky enough to have like my 5 or 6 interviews scheduled on the same day.
Oh, okay.
Not easy, but trust me, you want them all done in a day instead of having them spread out over like multiple weeks.
Right.
Having them in a day is definitely, looking back, the better idea between the two.
But wouldn't you get exhausted by the end, like on that day? Like
I was. I mean, I remember. So my interviews were in Bangalore. Old Madras Road is where the office is, and I lived in HSR layout, right? So the interview started at 10. I had horribly miscalculated my traffic and commute.
Right.
So I was like, literally, I reached there like 2 minutes before the first interviews was supposed to start.
Right.
Thankfully, they had kept a half an hour buffer, knowing
nice.
that you could potentially get late. So eventually the process started at 10:30, which was great because I needed to calm down, right?
Right.
I didn't want to go into a frenzy.
Right.
But all of that ended on the same day at like 6.
Right.
I remember like completely like devoid of any energy left at the end of the day. Basically, I was like knocked out, right? I remember the ride back home was I think I just slept off in the cab ride back home. I had like nothing left in the tank. I was completely spent.
I can imagine.
Hopeful. I think I had a great experience. It was fun. I had a great lunch with my potential future teammates. Didn't know that back then, but yeah, it definitely also then depends on like what kind of interviewers you get from what region of the world, right? Like sometimes you get somebody from Poland, like I did. You have a hard time communicating because they sort of there's an accent involved. There are people in interview styles are different. The communication styles are different. You have to sometimes repeat yourself. It all basically is a game of variables, man. So there's definitely a little bit of luck involved in the specifics of the situation, but Google tries to sort of randomize enough that that seems to get averaged out along the length of your individual process. So like if you get like 1 or 2 bad experiences, that won't end up defining your outcome. So yeah.
Right. And, just to dig in a little bit deeper, I want to talk to you more about portfolio as well. But before that, the questions and the conversation during the interview at Google, were they like similar kind of question that you get asked in regular design interviews, or are is the same question but they dig in deeper, they question more? Like, does it differ a lot, or is it just same conversation over and over? Similar kind of questions but multiple rounds.
Yeah, so I think the planning committee basically decides the interviewers in a list, and they all ensure that every one of the interviews is about a different thing. Okay. So if you in a conversation, if you are sort of basically trying to like veer off the trajectory of like the core skills or the questions that they are trying to test, they do keep trying to sort of bring you back to the track. So they always sort of nudge you in the direction where they want you to go into in order to like clearly set you up for like answering exactly their question, not something else. Right. So it's all like there is not a lot of overlap between the kind of questions you get asked in the interview. So you may think that 6 interviews must get repetitive at some point, right? They largely don't, apart from like some common questions, right? Which is literally like 5 minutes in a 45-minute conversation. So other 40 minutes, you would end up discussing something very exclusive to that person and to that skill. Right. So that way, like it does remain very fresh in terms of what kind of things you discuss with the next person. Right. So for example, with an engineer, you would not talk about stuff that you would talk about with a researcher. Like they're extremely different. Also with like designer to designer, they would try to test you against different skills. Right. Sometimes you talk about like managing collaboration. Sometimes you talk about like simply like pure execution and like driving things and taking ownership and things like that. So that's how like the conversations differ. Right. But yeah, I mean, this is also where like it gets tricky, right? Like sometimes a person interviewing you is expecting certain things, but like also has a different interview style, which is what I meant when I said like personalities matter a lot. Right. So like if they are expecting X, Y, and Z, and you are talking about whatever U, V, and W, then you are slightly off, but they are not allowed to give you a hint, which means like the calibration doesn't happen. It could factor into the score that they rate you with. So all of those always come into play. But I mean, as I said, right, like it still tries to do the best it can, the process itself. Right.